Welcome back, everyone, to another PT Pro from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Dom.
I'm DocJen.
And today we're going to be talking hip hinges and activating those glutes and what the heck it means and why a COBA board is going to help us out avoid some of those common pitfalls when we do hip hinging. So stay tuned.
We're going to kind of talk through some of the common pitfalls that happen and how we can use solutions throughout our body to create these different cues without even having to really, hammer in like, do this, do that, do this, do that. And so we're going to talk through all those different ways that we kind of maximize the hip hinge and utilize the glutes within the body.
It can get pretty overwhelming sometimes when you step into somebody's office and they start telling you, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, and you need a hinge because whatever. And we just start getting lost and we start getting all these things thrown at us that we're not supposed to do. And I know that we were talking about this just before this, and that's like not a message that you or I want to convey to people as physical therapists. We want to convey the message that there are ways to do things most optimally in our body. And we can optimize also the way we feel during those things.
Honestly, any type of squat that you do is more of a knee dominant pattern. Yes, we could create a little bit more glute dominance, more hip dominance in a squat. But at the end of the day, if you squat all the way down, your knees are bending more, your quads are being used a lot more through the pressure over the knees. They're going to work. And so we don't want to create fear around that. It's just how can we still feel this good hip hinge pattern and utilize that in a deadlift, in bending over and quickly picking something off the floor, in all these other patterns. And then how do we not be so afraid of squats? And today we're really going to dive into just talking about the hip hinge. However, our hips are our access point, from our lower body to our upper body. So learning how to move better from them is really going to help efficiently just move and activate well throughout our body.
So when we use something like the COBA board, it helps us kind of do those things automatically just by stepping up on it. And we're going to show you some of those things today.
Yeah. Now, COBA board, what is this? Why do we have our feet on it? We've both posted about the COBA board on Instagram. Yeah. And I got lots of inquiries, which was incredible. Mm-hmm. So it's just this blue board that's quite small, really super light, and just uses resistance bands. So what makes it different than any other kind of resistance bands we're going to kind of talk through today. The reason is because of the shape of the board, what it automatically creates within the body, and how using this external cue, exactly, Dom said this earlier and I loved it, using an external device or cue can help to drive internal cues within the body.
When you're at a PT's office or somebody's trying to teach you these things, everything that they give you is an external cue. Whether they're saying something to you, whether they're using a tool to help you feel something, whether, again, it's a spot on a wall that we need to, focus on while we're doing an exercise to help drive something internally. And generally, when we use those externally driven cues efficiently, it helps us start to do things internally in our bodies, automatically. And one thing that I like to think about as a PT is how many external cues can somebody handle at once?
Yes.
If it's just cueing, great, but we can easily give somebody 20 cues and then they're immediately overwhelmed. Who is listening and has had somebody try to teach them how to do a movement and is just like walks out of that office feeling like they failed at life because they're getting so many cues and so much feedback. It's just instant overload.
Yeah.
Going back to the COBA board, we really try to do minimal cueing using something like this because, again, the way it positions your feet, it helps drive these internal processes in your body and you immediately start hinging better.
So some of the problems that typically end up happening with hip hinging, one of the most common I think people can think of is a deadlift. You watch someone do a deadlift and they round down at the very bottom or they round as they're coming up, right? That means the hips stop going forward and now my back is going to go the rest of the way forward. And oftentimes when people are doing this, they don't even realize it. So it is a very unconscious movement pattern that people are doing. And then we say, oh, well, they're rounding in the back, so that's bad. Lower back flexion, that's causing herniated disc, that's causing all that. Now, no. We don't go by the mindset of like you can't round in the back. However, we do want to move from every area of the body. So if we're only moving from that low back and we're not using those hips, that's when we could be overloading and putting increased pressure on one area rather than dispersing that pressure. And especially if we do that over and over and over and over again, all of a sudden that's when you go to pick up the pencil and you're like, oh, I rounded my back and it threw up my back. So I think the lack of awareness in the pelvis is another really huge one.
So I am a culprit at this when we talk about pelvic tilt, right? So we've had an episode on anterior pelvic tilt, and I am, a quintessential example of what anterior pelvic tilt will do to some of your patternings. And this is something I've been working on a lot. We anterior pelvic tilt to gain some extension in the system. And so I was driving a lot of my extension in my system from my low back whenever I would hinge, and that would cause some different issues in my body over time, especially since in college I was lifting heavier weights.
And I think it's such a common thing because at least what I remember growing up when I was learning lifting is to really arch the back.
Butt back, chest up.
Yes.
That's what I heard all the time. Butt back, chest up, look at the ceiling. And for me, those 3 cues immediately put me in a position that my body probably shouldn't be in, and my body probably wasn't ready to lift weights that I was lifting at the time. So for me, I always found doing something slightly different with my vision and my body helped me feel better in those lifts. And I should have listened to that a lot sooner.
Right. But when you don't know and you're being told one way to move, and that's what happens, then people end up dumping forward a little too much with a lack of that pelvic awareness and stability and support. We dump forward and then we come up and we almost hyper correct it. And then you might dump the other way and then really squeeze at the top, or you stay in that extended position and then you just use your back to really activate that squeeze. And you'll see people go into this deadlift pattern where they're coming down and then they want to really get that good they want to really get that good glute squeeze. So all of a sudden they pull back and you'll see their back arch.
So what do you think? You want to stand up and show some of these things and then
Sure.
hop on the board? So why don't you show everybody what it means to have that anterior pelvic tilt. So Jen's going to kind of dump into this anterior pelvic tilt when she goes down into a deadlift. So she's pointing those hip bones down towards the ground.
For me to do.
She's got this bigger arch in her low back and her knees are just almost locked straight. So she's really just using tension in those hamstrings to kind of stop her pelvis and then turn the motion around. And that's something that's not her normal patterning. So it's almost tough for her to do that example. All right, now a little bit more knee dominance in your hinge. So now Jen, if you notice, her knees are just coming forward, kind of out towards those toes. She's actually using those knees to get depth and not sitting that butt back as much. So there's some knee dominance, and we're seeing her from the side, but some people might also let those knees track inward.
I think what happens too sometimes when people are super hypermobile in the hamstrings like I am, when they come down, they think, oh, I don't feel it yet. And it's not until you get, so you can kind of see in my back how I even round,
even she starts flattening out once she hits her hamstrings limit of sorts.
But then I'm still just moving from my back rather than really using my hips.
All right, so I think if we show rounding in the spine during that deadlift, so now Jen's going to be going down and just rounding through that back, right? Rounding through the low back, rounding through the upper back. And if you notice, she just kind of squeezes her butt at the top to make her feel like she's doing a glute exercise, even though all that motion or a lot of that motion is coming from flexing and extending through the back as she goes up and down.
And I honestly feel so much more tension right at my SI area, so right where my low back meets my tailbone.
Totally.
That puts so much more pressure even as I come up and as I squeeze at the very top.
So now we're hopping up on the COBA board and we're going to see how this board helps with some of those things. So the very first thing you're going to notice, especially if you're watching, your toes raise up into a little bit more dorsiflexion. And what that does immediately is it's going to kind of tip our body backwards, right? And so what Jen wants to do to avoid that is stick the hips back a little bit. It automatically just makes you want to push your hips back to keep your balance, right? If you think about raising your toes, whether you're, standing somewhere or just sitting, it's going to kind of make you want to lean back. So sticking the hips back is the first cue that automatically clicks in. Next, Jen is going to come down and grab this band, not thinking of anything else, but the band being in front of her it's going to kind of make her want to pull back with her arms to activate these lats to stay really solid through this thoracic spine as she goes down, or her upper back. And then all she's going to do is try and lift that up, squeeze through the buttons. Again, the way it raises these toes into dorsiflexion, she's staying much more in this back chain the whole time. What are you feeling?
I mean, it's like the easiest thing to be able to do. That's the other thing. A lot of people, sometimes they have the weight too far away from their legs, and then that will kind of pull down and make them round into the back. And what this is doing, now that I'm falling backwards because my toes are raised and I'm putting automatically more pressure into the heels. So when I'm pulling back, I'm automatically going to pull these bands toward my legs, which is what you want in the deadlift. Before you even pull a bar, you should be activating into these lats. So if you think about pulling this resistance, which there's 3 different bands in the COBA board, so it makes it, you can up the resistance, down the resistance, whatever you need. So if I pull back, I automatically almost lifted my chest and get my lats right behind my armpits to kind of pinch. My hips are back, so I'm already like sitting down here, feeling it in my glutes. And then I just stand.
Yeah. And seriously, I say this about this COBA board. So we've been using this for a little while now. And one, I had a lot of issues myself with hinging patterns. And people are always worried about at home not being able to have enough weight. And every time I use this thing, I wake up the next day, glutes are sore, hamstrings are sore. I can feel that those things were working in a way that I might not internally drive myself when I just do deadlifts and stuff on the ground. Mm-hmm. So having this thing with the resistance bands, and you can always add in other bands, right, to up the weight. So it really helps you load those in a way that you might not do on your own. And when you put resistance with it, you're going to feel it.
And then last little cue that you can use when you're wanting to increase that pattern within the body is to actually take an inhale on the way down. Mm-hmm. So if I have this weight or resistance, and then I inhale as my bottom naturally goes back, I mean, it's just this natural expansion of my rib cage, which kind of opens up and pulls into my lats more, and then the squeeze into my glutes as I exhale and lift.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the hamstrings, and if you're only feeling deadlift or hinge pattern exercises in your hamstrings, right? So we kind of talked about how people might just be relying on those hamstrings to tell them when they've gone down far enough, might be moving a little more through the back. One thing that you want to maybe try doing is when you're going down into that deadlift, just unlocking those knees a tiny bit at the bottom to then still push more into those glutes rather than letting those hamstrings get so tight at the bottom. If you unlock those knees a little bit, take a little tension off the hamstrings and push you a little more into those glutes. Make sure though, we're not unlocking the knees too much at the top of the deadlift. Otherwise, like Jen said earlier, that'll activate those quads on the front of the thigh right away and put us into more of that front of the body in a squat pattern. So unlocking the knees slightly at the bottom of that deadlift will help you sit a little more into the glutes.
And there's so many exercises because of the way that you can move these bands around, take them out, really like make it so easy. You could do glute bridges, you could do lunges. We do single leg they work all the time on this band. You could do kickbacks, you could do things that really help to focus in, get that good hip hinge pattern, and automatically drive more pressure into the glutes, which we're going to talk with one of my favorite professors, Dr. Scott Lynn. He's a biomechanist. He did a study on the COBA board. Proving, literally proving that the glutes work more. All
right, now why don't we jump into a few things that are a little more challenging as far as the hip hinge goes, because I know that there are some real go-getters out there. So we're going to show you how to make things a little more complex. And with exercise, the one thing about like adding in complexity that I like to everyone should be focused on, like, okay, how does this translate to life, Mm-hmm. And why does doing these things more complex or more complexly help me live better in life? And it's because we've been talking about this hinge and this squat pattern, right? Like they're two completely separate and different things. And in reality, there's like a spectrum of this movement that throughout life, we're just going to get put in things. Or even for the hinge, We're not always going to be able to set up this perfect hinge pattern and just do it. So when we start adding in different components or making it a little more complex, we're just preparing our body to encounter some things in the real world, because we don't live in a test tube and we can't always have a super controlled environment. So why don't we hop up? We're going to show a single leg deadlift. Great. So Jen is going to plant her one foot pretty near where she's lifting the weight up from. Are you going to do it one hand or two?
I'll show two first.
All right, so she's going to grab with both hands, right? And starting at the top, she's just going to lift her heel, and she's really the whole time just going to be trying to stretch long through that back leg that goes up. One other thing you'll notice, she really sits well into her stance leg. So she's sitting super well into that right glute right now and not allowing her pelvis, you have a great angle of it, to tilt side to side. One thing that helps that, yep, like that. She's really opening that pelvis up. And a way to really keep that is by feeling yourself push back into that stance glute to keep that pelvis flat and reaching long through that opposite leg. What else do you think?
So one of the ways that I like to kind of help that, one, don't go too heavy on it. That was probably a little too heavy for me.
3 bands for a single leg, dang.
And if you put the hand that you're starting the leg on, and you put that hand on your hip, and it's going to be a reminder as to where this is going. So see how my hip is going backwards here. This automatically gets hip, knee, big toe alignment. Perfect. Okay. So now let's take the other leg away. As I do that, drop back. And then now I'm not lifting in this other glute at all. I'm feeling it all right here, literally in my hip. And then I push back. So I love this extra cue of pulling out, letting that come down, coming back up.
Woo! You're going to be sore. You got to do it on the other side. I'm waiting until we're done for that. All right. The glute raise?
Yeah,
or hip thrust of sorts? All right. So the next one is a popular exercise, like a bridge. It's basically just a bridge since she's flat on the ground. Difference being the toes are raised again.
So again, great thing about this this board is that you have the ability to move all these bands, do them in different ways. And this is actually the black band, so there's a brown band for this as well. So it's not quite as tight, but it's going to go all the way down to your hip region.
Yep, you'll just let that rest right up on kind of underneath or just about where those knobs in the front of your hip are. Of course, toes are elevated. Jen is going to use her hands to kind of press down if she wants to really engage through her shoulder blades. And then really, the board's going to do the rest. So she's going to press up and squeeze through those glutes. As you notice, her shins stay pretty vertical and her knees are not going to be pointing out through over those toes. Again, a benefit of that board pushing us back. See, if she has those heels tucked back a little more, those knees are going to be coming out more. And I'm guessing you can feel that a little more up in the top of the thigh.
Yep.
So much more comfortable to make sure that when you raise your hips, shins staying relatively vertical. If you notice, she kind of keeps her chin tucked down. So her head's going to be off the ground, but she's keeping a good double chin tuck, which is really, again, going to help her keep activated in the front of that body and keep from arching in the back. Because a lot of people, you want to show arch through the back, is just arching through that low back rather than really squeezing and getting that extension through the buns.
Yeah, and a lot of people think the higher that I go, the more that I arch, the more that I get up to my neck, the more that I'm going to activate those glutes, which is not happening.
No, and it's just not as functional because we never are going to be pushing into that extreme of a range in the low back and the glutes. So when you keep the core activated, strong, stable core, strong, stable pillar to then move at the hips from. So.
Yeah, and it's like almost thinking of tucking under. I mean, you don't have to literally tuck under like this, but you're thinking more of that tucking under so that you really maximize what's happening in those glutes.
All right, so the last one we're going to show you is just a kickback. So something people really commonly do to activate that glute again. But here Jen's going to show you what a lot of people will commonly do that might not be so optimal. So you can see we're just extending, flexing, getting a lot of range through that low back. And we're really doing ourselves a disservice because you're not letting your glute control through that range like we should be in this exercise. One thing Jen likes to do, she just puts her elbows down on the ground. What that does is it helps her push through her shoulder blades, keep a really stable upper back. And because she's kind of bending forward, it's going to keep that low back a little more rounded so that you're not going to be able to extend through it as much anyway. It's going to help her focus that extension through the glute.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect.
This is like
Right?
freaking, I taught Pilates. Ugh, that's like Pilates on steroids right there.
Right. So one, small little change, or it might seem small, but it makes an astronomical difference in where we're targeting that exercise. And again, if you're somebody who does glute exercises and feels a lot in their low back or SI area, this is something you should start paying attention to.
Oh, yeah. This sport is really kind of incredible for everything that it does. Yes, all transparency, we're partnered with them. Why? Because they came to us at first. I was turned off. Full transparency. It was a lot of, glute marketing, have better looking butt. And I'm not for that. Like, okay, it might look better, it might gain muscle, but I'm more about the function. Why would someone functionally do this?
We have glutes because they do a certain thing in our body, not because they look good. That's just a positive benefit.
Yeah. So they went back and they changed things, and they really listened to Scott. Again, Dr. Scott Lynn, my professor from undergrad, who is worked with golf professionals all over the world, baseball professionals. Like, he is really well known in terms of actually teaching biomechanics. Did a study on it, learned, or Mike said, oh yeah, it really does. Like, it activates the glutes, just puts you in a better positioning. And so when they came back with really wanting more about this functional aspect and being able to work out anywhere and have it accessible, that's when him and I were like, okay, let's give it a try.
Yeah.
And we used it.
Yeah. I mean, everything that we partner with and promote, we use. And I told you earlier, I'm not BSing you when I say I wake up the next day and this thing is sore. And I'm somebody who used to deadlift 500 plus pounds. Like, this board puts load through me in a way that a barbell sometimes might not be able to as much because it gives me those cues. So we started using it. We loved it. And now other people are telling us the same thing.
Yep. And you use it with your clients all the time.
Totally. I use it with clients. Again, it helps them feel cues that I can't quite explain with my words or show them with my hands sometimes, or by demonstrating. So we use it with clients, we use it ourselves. And it's just a great way, again, to start helping your body feel something different and have something to pull against in home that can give you a lot of load. It's so, like Jen says, so lightweight, tucks away anywhere, but gives a lot of load for you.
Yeah. I bring it to work out with one of my girlfriends at the park all the time. And she is someone who's very quad dominant. And when you talk about only learning how to activate the quads. And when we started working with her on this, her glutes were on fire.
Yeah.
And so it's really, when you start using something different, doing something different, you get to feel something different.
Yeah. So check out the COBA board. We have code DocJenFit. It gets you 10% off. We'll throw a link somewhere in here. And check it out. Feel it. Try it for yourself. And yeah, we know that you'll feel it because we do.
Exactly. Thanks so much for watching us, learning some things about your glutes, and really seeing how you can maximize what you're feeling within the body. This is why we continue to do these and what we want to continue to do for you. So hope you come back next time, continue learning these PT pearls with us through the Optimal Body Podcast.